show you how to make a hat using a sewing machine. It is so much fun, and when you're done, you'll have a hat that looks like one of these. Like this is my favorite one, my rainbow hat. You can see it's got the colors of the rainbow on it in rose form. And then you can make any color you want. This is a plum one, and I've accented it with pink. And you can even make winter hats. So you just reduce the width of the brim, and then you've got a winter hat. And it only takes a few hours. And my patterns are below, and ping me if you have any questions. And just to give you a heads up, this video has a lot of steps in it, so brace yourself, but it's so much fun. When you're done, you'll have a hat that looks like one of these. There is a video that has fewer steps, and you can take advantage of that one as too. It's very basic. And take your pick, depending on your skill level, and let's jump right in. Okay, so now we're ready to cut out our material. So we have 4 materials that we're working with. The first one is a white satin, and this is to make this rainbow hat, which is what we're working on today. And what you want to do is get a satin that is a brushed satin. It's not glossy like most satins. And don't you agree that the glossy satin is not really in right now? More of a brushed muted look is in right now. So we need 1 yard of that for 60-inch wide bolt. And number 2, we'll need lining. And what you want is a 1/2 yard of that. And you want a color that will complement your hat material. And then we need interfacing. So your interfacing is fusible mid-weight. And so fusible just means you iron it on. Okay, so there are 2 kinds of interfacing that you need. One is mid-weight interfacing, which is between lightweight and heavyweight, and you can get that at the fabric store in your community. And that is used for the crown and the top. That's used for the crown right here and the top, the crown top. It's a little lighter than heavyweight. But for the brim, which is this part, you want to use heavyweight interfacing. And that you can find online, and I've listed it below. And I've got both of them here. The heavyweight is actually a interior design grade heavyweight, because I couldn't find it at the fabric store, so I went online. And that's what you need for interfacing. The reason you want interfacing is because you want a stiff hat. You don't want a floppy hat. Okay, and then the last item that we need is the hat trim. And this is what it looks like when you're done. You want a contrasting color. You can keep it the same color, but it's nice to have a contrasting color. And so what I like to use is just a spool of 2.5-inch wide double-faced ribbon. This is actually not double-faced, but you can use regular satin ribbon or another kind of ribbon. And if you don't have ribbon, or if it's too expensive, you can just get 2 yards of any material and cut it out 70 inches by 2.5 inches. Super long, super thin piece of material. All right, so let's jump right in. We're going to measure our head. So what you want to do is measure your head at the largest circumference or the largest line on your head. So what you want to do is just measure right about here. And most women's heads are 21 to 25 inches, and my patterns are all in that range from extra small to extra large. So take your pick And next we'll talk about patterns. Okay friends, so now we're going to do our pattern. What you want here is a lot of patience. Patience is a virtue here, and what I mean by that is that you want to measure twice and cut once. What they say is true. So, types of patterns. You can either buy one that's existing from the store, but what you want to know is that the pattern companies don't let you sell what you've made because it's their copyright, just so you know. My patterns are below and are free, as well as Wild Ginger software. I believe in high fashion for all. That's my mantra. And so my patterns are free, affordable, and accessible to everyone. And here's the pattern paper that I use. This is a store-bought roll for $15. Or you can use a brown paper bag from the grocery store, or you can use gift wrapping paper as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw and we're going to cut our pattern. And I just want to encourage you, you can do this. You can even modify my patterns to your liking. So let's jump right in. Okay, so now we're going to do the crown. This is the hardest part, but you can do it. So Wild Ginger software, just so you know, and some software cuts on a straight line, the crown, but I like to cut it on a curve like this, because when you cut it a little bit on a curve, it makes the crown top smaller than the crown bottom, and it puts it at an angle. It gives it more dimension and a little more beauty. And so for a 22-inch head, which is about the average size head, you need to add 2 inches. That gives us 24 inches divided by 2 is 12. And so you've got a 12-inch crown bottom. That's what we're going to do. And you can see it here. And this is the fold right here. This is the end of the pattern piece. All right, so let's do it. Okay, so now we'll be working with the crown top, and the brim. Here are all 3 pieces here that you'll end up with. And what you want to know is the crown top, which I'm holding right now, is going to be a little bit bigger than the inside of the brim. And that's because of the seam allowance. So it'll be a little bit bigger. And here's the crown. You see it's cut at an angle and not straight across. And these are the 3 pieces we'll need. Okay, so now we're going to draw the crown top. So just take your pattern paper, whether it's a brown paper bag or real pattern paper like this, or even the back side of wrapping paper, and cut out a square like I just did, and then fold it into 4s. Your 4s should be pretty even. You can even iron your pattern pieces to make them flat. My mom always loved doing that. Then take your ruler and measure 3 4/8 inches for a 22-inch head from the center of the top of the circle that you are making. 3 4/8 inches. Make your dots all across, and then start to connect your dots by drawing a line. And it's a little tedious, but the patience pays off because you have a perfect crown top. It really makes it beautiful and polished. And then cut out your pattern piece. And there you have it. It's going to be your first pattern piece. And don't forget to write down on the pattern piece what it is. Size 22-inch hat, crown, top. We're good to go now. Okay, so now we're ready to draw the brim. The way you draw the brim is similar to the round crown top. Take your square piece of brown paper bag or pattern paper and fold it into quarters like I'm doing now. And for the internal part of the brim, measure 2 6/8 inches from the center. 2 6/8. And make your dots and connect them. And it's a little tedious, but it's worth it. It pays off because you have a perfect size. And then, when you finish doing that, go to the outside or the external part of the brim. That's about 7 or 8 inches outside the internal part of the brim. Just like this, make your dots and connect them. And don't forget to mark your pattern, size 22 brim. Then cut it out And then next for the brim is to cut out 4 inches at the base of the brim. I'll show you here now, right here, so that your finished hat is taut or tight and there's not a lot of give, and it's not a flappy brim, basically. It's taut, and there we have it. Okay, so let's do our final piece, our crown. So we are drawing a 12-inch line on a curve on the bottom of the crown. That's what I'm doing now. And I'm marking also the height of the crown, which is 5 inches wide or 5 inches tall. And so you just make your dots all the way across and connect them. And now you can see I'm just made a little bit of a mistake, but you can always erase. And what you want to know too, the top of the crown is 9 6/8 inches across. And now just cut out your pattern piece, and don't forget to write on your pattern piece 22-inch hat and crown, and also write the fold right there. Okay, so now we're going to cut out our material using the pieces we just made, using our pattern pieces. And so number 1, we have the brim. We want 2 pieces of hat material cut out, and we want to cut out 1 piece of heavyweight fusible interfacing. And then number 2, for the crown top, we want to cut out 1 piece of hat material, 1 piece of mid-weight fusible interfacing, and 1 piece of lining. And then number 3, for the crown, it's the same as the crown top. 1 piece of hat material, 1 piece of mid-weight interfacing fusible, and 1 piece of lining. And then when you do the crown, place the crown on the fold. And don't forget that, or it'll be way too short. And then we're going to iron it on next. So you can do it. Keep it up. You're doing great. Okay, so now we're going to iron. And this is pretty easy, but you do need patience because it takes a little time to do the fusing. So the pieces that we're going to iron are all the pieces. You really want the material to not have any wrinkles in it before you sew it, because it's a lot easier to do the ironing before you sew, of course. But I say that because you really have to have patience when you're doing the ironing, because you've got this big piece, which is the brim, and you have to iron each and every piece together, the fusing the interfacing to the material. And here's the big full piece, as you can see. And then we have only 2 other pieces to fuse together, and that's the crown top and then the crown here. So let's get started. Okay, so now we're ironing our heavyweight interfacing brim to our material brim. And you saw that I just made sure that the 2 pieces were aligned to each other just right. So iron according to the instructions that came with the interfacing, and iron section by section like I'm doing now, one at a time. Then when you're done, section by section, you need to iron out all the lines created by the hot iron. You do this just by taking the iron and smoothing over all the area of the brim. You want to do the same smoothing technique for the crown and the crown top too. You're doing great. Okay, so now we're ready to sew. So we want to start first with either the crown or the brim, and you just sew the ends together, and be sure to sew the right sides together in this case. And here we have the crown, and we'll just sew the ends together. Okay, so now we're ready to sew the brim together, the ends of the brim together. So here's our brim, as we know, don't forget. And so you just fold it in and sew the ends together. And make sure they're pretty much symmetrical, and if you need to, trim this off to make it even. Don't trim too much off though. And let's do it. Okay, so now we have our crown and our crown top, and we're going to pin them together, and it's going to be likely, just to give you fair warning, that they won't match up, so you have to do some finagling. But be sure you do the right sides together and start pinning. And when I say finagling, I mean that you're going to need to take some pins out and redo them so that they're even, so that the crown top and the crown are even all the way around. So just keep pinning all the way around. So when you're pinning, just enjoy the time, and you can even do some meditation. You can say a prayer for someone and say a prayer for yourself too. Don't forget to do that for your sewing project. And I want to show you, for this hat that I made, you'll see in a moment, the pieces will not match up. You'll see that the crown top is bigger than the crown. You'll see it here. So since there's so much extra, we'll need to cut away a 1/4 inch from the outside of the perimeter. You saw it right there. There was too much. So I'm taking out all the pins and I'm cutting a 1/4 inch all the way around. And sometimes you don't need to cut away. If there's just a small amount, you can actually just clip the rim of the top of the crown itself, which loosens the crown. But in this case, I had too much of the crown top, so I did have to cut it. It really depends how you cut out your pattern, if there will be extra or not. But it's always good to have too much than not enough. And here I'm clipping a second time. So just keep clipping and pinning until you get the top and the crown to match. Now we're ready to pin the brim. So take both sides of the brim and pin the edge or the rim of the brim together, wrong sides together this time. You really want to pin before you sew because it helps make each piece even with the other throughout the whole piece. So pin about 10 times around, and don't worry if you have an uneven center. Don't worry if the inside of the two brim pieces are uneven with each other. They will eventually even out in the end. Okay, so now we're going to sew the crown to the crown top. You want at least 5/8 inches seam allowance because you need room for the wire. When you sew, you want to make sure that your material is as flat as possible. Any areas that are ruffled or bunched on the inside will be ruffled or bunched or gathered on the outside. So work really hard at going slowly, bit by bit, pin by pin,
Take your time and create a polished crown. And after you finish sewing the crown to the crown top, do the same thing for the lining. Pin and sew the lining together in the exact same way. Okay, so now here's another angle. You can see that I'm really taking my time, allowing the machine to stop at every point where there's a pin so I can flatten the material before I sew it. Keep on doing great work. Okay, so now we are going to sew the wire into the top of the crown. Take your wire and situate it in between the two seams, in between the seam of the crown top and the seam of the crown. As I'm doing now, leave a good amount extra wire sticking out beyond where you're going to start. That's for the wires to overlap at the end. And here's another angle. You really want the wires to overlap at the end so that neither of them sticks out or pokes out. And now, in just a second, we're going to sew the wire in. I've heard folks use a zipper foot for this, but I prefer to pull and tug bit by bit as I go along. It's just easier for me. As with sewing much of this kind of hat, you really want to take your time sewing inch by inch, sewing and stopping and sewing and stopping to make sure your wire is situated correctly and you don't accidentally miss sewing the wire into the crown. When you're close to the end, don't forget to overlap the wires. Take extra time here and have patience because you really want to ensure the wires are sewn inside and not outside your seam. You're doing great. Okay, so now we're going to inspect our sewn wire. You can see here where the wire is with the hat still right side out. If there are places where the wire didn't make it in, just go back and sew that portion in if you can. Hopefully you won't have to pull out your seam and sew it over. The key is just to take your time. That's really the key. And here's our finished crown. You're doing great.
Okay, so now we're going to take these two, the crown and the lining, and put the lining inside the crown. So we want to make sure that this is outside in, or inside out rather. And then you put it inside the hat. And then stitch along the edge. And it's super easy. I do about 1/8 of an inch all the way around. Okay, so now we're ready to sew the brim, and what you want to remember is that the wrong sides are together. Don't forget, just like we pinned it, but just double check. And then what we want to do is sew about 1/2 inch all the way around. That leaves room for the trim and the wire. Okay, so let's sew it up. Okay, so what I want you to know is I'm sewing 1 inch all the way around, but I don't want you to do that. I messed up, but I'm going to keep going. So what I want you to do is just sew 1/2 inch all the way around. I'm going to have to trim mine off, but you'll be fine if you just sew 1/2 inch all the way around.
Okay, so here we're sewing the brims together. Just sew 1/2 inch all the way around.
Okay, so now what we're going to do is sew our wire into this hat on the edge of the brim. Okay, so here's our wire, here's our seam, and then what we're going to do is sew a zigzag stitch all along the edge, sewing the wire into the zigzag stitch. And then what you have up here is extra wire. You want to leave that because it's going to overlap with the extra wire on the other end when it finishes, so that we join it together that way. Okay, so let's start zigzagging. Okay, so now our brim outer edge is sewn together, and now what we need to do is sew the inside together. So just pin it down, and what you want to make sure that you do is don't make it taut, because if it's taut, your hat will look strange and it will look taut when you're wearing it. So you see here in some parts of the inner center, they're uneven, the edges are uneven, but that's okay, because what we're going to do, we're going to sew about 2 or 3 times all the way around, all the way out to here, so that it lies flat. Okay, so now what we have is we sewed 3 times all the way around, and these seams are a 1/4 inch seam, 1, 2, 3, and the reason we do that again is to make sure that it lies flat, and also that it doesn't bunch. And also what we're going to do when we pin the top to the brim is we're going to cut parts of this out so that it fits just right. It'll require a lot of prayers and a lot of pinning. And now we're ready to work on attaching the top of the hat to the bottom of the hat, the crown to the brim. And what I did just now is I cut already. I started to cut about 1/2 inch, which is 2 1/4 inches of the inside out of the hat. I completely cut it out. And so what we want to do now is pin the crown top to the brim and see if it matches up. Okay, so I pinned it, but I didn't cut enough on the outside, which is okay, because you want to take your time when you're cutting, because if you cut too much, there's no going back. You have to make a new brim. And so you can see here there's too much, there's extra, and there's no place to put it. So I'm going to have to cut a little bit more on the outside. I'm only going to cut 1/4 inch or less. I'll probably cut 1/8 inch just to be safe, and if I have to cut again, it'll be okay. So just take your time when you cut out the inside of the hat. Okay, well, I cut out 1/4 inch again, or 1/8 inch again, and it's still not enough. I still have about 2 inches extra of the top. So I'm gonna have to sew again another 1/4 inch all the way around, and then cut this part right here, because it's just too small, the brim top. But that's okay, because we're not going to go back and have to create another brim. We're just going to use what we have and just measure twice and cut once. And say our prayers too. Let's do it. Okay, so that worked for me. So now I pinned it all, and it all matches up perfectly. So what I'm going to do is sew all along here about 1/4 inch, and what you want to do is just sew this part, and don't catch the lining. Be sure you don't catch the lining, and let's do it. Okay, everyone, so now what we want to do is sew along the edge. You want to do just about 1/2 inch from the edge, not 5/8, but 4/8, just because we're going to need when we put the ribbon around, when we sew the ribbon around, we're going to need to have some extra space for the ribbon to cover up the seam that we're sewing. So we want it to be a little bit smaller. So 1/2 inch, 4/8 an inch all around. Let's do it.
Okay, friends, so don't forget to take your time when you're sewing the crown and the brim together. Take your time and just go pin by pin, stopping the machine as you go along and restarting it and stopping it and starting it, and you'll have a seam that's flawless.
Okay, friends, so now we see we've got a finished seam. And so what we have, I ended up doing about 3/8 of an inch around instead of 4/8 of an inch because it was just easier this time. This hat was a little feisty. The lining was creeping up on the inside, and I kept having to push it back. But you can see all the way around we have 3/8 of an inch. I did make a mistake here, and it's a little bunchy, and it shows on the other side. There's a little bit of a gathering there. It's probably not going to show that much on the hat, and I might just put the flowers on this side so that it doesn't show at all. That's always a trick you can use. So you can see we have a great finished product here. And don't worry if your seams are off a little bit right here. You see this top seam, the crown seam, is not perfectly aligned with the brim seam, but that's okay because there's going to be a ribbon around it. So don't worry about the details sometimes. All right, so now we have an almost finished hat. And so what you want to do is turn it around and take your grosgrain ribbon. It should be roughly the same color, and pin it all the way around. And what you want to do is don't forget to overlap. When you start with a little bit over the edge so that it doesn't have an opening. And then when you're finished, you're going to take the edge of it and overlap it like that.
And when you're pinning, just enjoy the process. It's just like life. Just pinning one thing at a time, just doing one thing at a time. And before you know it, it will all be done. But the key is patience and just enjoy the process, all of it, every single bit.
Okay, so now we're ready to sew the grosgrain ribbon on. So what you want to do is sew as close to the edge as possible so that when you're wearing the hat, this is going to be tucked under when you're wearing the hat so that it doesn't creep up. So you want to sew as close to the edge as possible. And you see our seam is here, so it's super close. So you want to really get to the edge as possible. Okay, let's do it. And don't forget, when you're using a needle, you want to use a 110 needle, which is a leather needle, because there are so many layers of material when you're sewing the grosgrain ribbon into the hat, that you want to make sure that your needle is super sharp. So I just changed my needle just for the grosgrain ribbon. And so here we have it. We sewed the grosgrain ribbon into the hat, and thankfully I was pretty close to the edge. Though you do see a seam there, but it's pretty good, thankfully. I always say a prayer before I sew, and it actually helps a lot. Okay, so now we're ready to sew the trim on. It is so much fun to sew the trim because it makes it so pretty and so polished. Okay, so all you have to do is, you see, this is the outside, the right side that we want to have shown. So because of that, we just sew it like this, right sides together. So sew right sides together all along the edge, allowing enough space. You don't want your inside seam to show here. And so what you want to do is sew a little bit further out, maybe a 1/2 inch. And then when you're finished, it'll be like this. And then we'll sew it underneath as well. Okay, and also when you sew, you want to leave, when you sew this, this on, whatever this is called, the trim, you want to do this to it. Fold it over and sew along here so that when you're done, it'll be nice and polished. Okay? So fold it over and sew along the edge about a 1/2 inch. Okay, and before we sew the trim on, we want to sew the trim down. This is going to be for the inside of the trim. And so here we have the wrong side. So flip it over and sew down about, this is about 3/8 of an inch. And just sew it down. Okay, so now just sew the trim onto the hat, and all you want to do is make sure that your seam, which is on the outside or the white side of the hat underneath the trim, doesn't show, and then you'll have a polished seam. Okay, so now we have our almost finished hat, and what we want to do, we have the trim sewn already onto the edge of the brim, so you just want to flip it under, flip the trim under the brim of the hat, on the edge of the hat, all the way around, and then next we're going to sew with a slip stitch the trim underneath. So flip it over, and we have to hand sew all the way around. It's really tedious, but you can do it when you're watching TV or talking with friends or at the fireplace. Okay, so this is the underside of the brim here. This is the top part of the brim, as you can see here. So what you want to do is go on the underside of the brim and tuck it under one more time. Let's see if I can do it. So that even the underside has a nice finish, because when you wear a hat you do see the underside. Okay, so there's the underside, bringing it closer. And what we're going to do is a slip stitch. And if you need to, look on YouTube how to do a slip stitch, but I'm just going to show you the basics. So you just start by grabbing the hat material, and then you grab a little bit of the trim, then you go on the inside of it, pull it out, and then you want to grab a little bit more. I'll have to cut this part off, as you can see. That's the end. And then you grab a little bit more of the material of the hat on the underside. Ouch. And it takes a long time, but it has a beautiful, beautiful finish. So it's really worth it. And then pull it through. And you do that all the way around. Okay, so now we're ready to put the trim on. So what you want to do is go to the place at the end of the trim where you want the trim to go and cut it off. Cut some extra just in case. And you don't want to glue the whole thing because when you're wearing the hat, your head expands the material and therefore the trim as well. So just take your hot glue gun. It can be any kind, any brand, and just put some on it. Let it sit for a moment. And then put your other, let's see, I cut too much, but that's okay. It's better to have too much than not enough. Okay, and then what you're going to do is fold over the ribbon and hot glue it first. Your glue is super hot, so just be so careful. Sometimes I like to let this dry first, but you don't really need to. And then just glue. Make sure your hat all the way around. Make sure your ribbon all the way around is situated well. And then glue this part on. And roses or some other embellishment can cover up this as well. And it takes just a moment to do. And you can see mine is a little high, but my roses are going to cover that up. And it will be lower in other parts. It will sit well in other parts like this. And there we have it. So friends, here we have our finished hat. It's so beautiful. I just love it. And I did add these rainbow of roses and leaves out of material I got from online. And I'll put a pattern measurement for roses. It's pretty simple. You can probably find it online or at the fabric store, but I'll put it on my page. And then we have our finished hat here. I hope you wear your hat well. I hope your project goes wonderfully. There will be mistakes, but don't worry. Just have patience and just endure through it. You can do it. I believe that you can do it if you have the patience. And I pray that God would also bless you, make his face to shine upon you, and give you a ton of peace as you do your project. Nothing is too small for him. He cares about every little thing, including you. So I hope you enjoy your project. Ping me if you have any questions, and let's keep in touch.